said, I am in the English department here, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the penultimate panel of this conference. I think I'm going to learn a lot from this panel and enjoy it very much. We have speakers talking about Lincoln's international legacy. We're going to learn about art murals from Mexico. We're going to go to Israel and learn about the intersection between politics and religion. And we're going to end in Iran with a Persian epic about Abraham Lincoln. So it's going to be an extraordinary panel, and perhaps because I'm a professor of English, the words of Cassius from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar come to mind. Why, man, he doth bestride this narrow world like Colossus. If it was true of Julius Caesar, it's certainly true of Abraham Lincoln. So our first speaker today is Ronald Byrd, who's going to be talking about Mexican murals that depict Abraham Lincoln. What I'm going to do is allot an equal time to each speaker. We're going to give each speaker 35 minutes, which should be time to present, and then have an interactive session after that. Once we get to that 35 minutes, I'm going to use this really exciting little bell. I'm looking forward to doing that. If there are still questions for that speaker, we're going to hold those questions until the end of the panel, so that each speaker has adequate and reasonable time to present and to engage with you as an audience. So, Ronald, thank you very much.
10 long and bloody years later, Jose Vasconcelos was appointed director of the Nationalist University at the age of 38. Yeah, that has to be very remarkable. Think of a 38-year-old running your university. But this was the National University of Mexico, and at age 38, he was heading it. In December of the same year, the just elected President Obregón appointed Vasconcelos head of the newly created Ministry of Public Education and Ministry of Public Education, and the Mexican Revolution continued, extended into the classroom and into art. The resulting comprehensive attack by Vasconcelos and his ministry on pervasive illiteracy is worthy of our full attention, but for today, for the moment, his promotion of Dr. Adolf's dream takes precedence. He commissioned several of Mexico's most talented painters to abandon their portrait and landscape painting, which was done for individuals, and rather to produce art for the masses in murals on the walls of important buildings. Among the muralists he supported, 3 stand out clearly: David Alfaro Siqueiros, Jose Clemente Orozco, and Diego Rivera. And you've probably heard more about Rivera. He's the most famous of the 3, probably. Siqueiros led a very tumultuous life, and it was partly because of his communist leanings. He fought against, before he fought in the Spanish Civil War. Of course, he did murals, but he left his paintings to go to Spain and join in the fight against Franco. And he was he didn't just talk the talk; he walked it. He went to war. One of the interesting things to me about the Spanish Civil War was the effect that it had on a lot of people in terms of pro or con leanings about with regard to communism. You know, the fascists, Franco was supported by Hitler and Mussolini, and the only support the government got was really from Russia, which made a lot of people think, well, maybe the communists have something for us, particularly there in Spain. But anyway, it affected Sequeiros' thinking, emphasized his sympathy for communism. He was also involved in a failed assassination attempt later on Leon Trotsky in Mexico. And he jumped bail and left the country, went into exile for several years. And during the time he was in exile, it was a low ebb in his financial life. He was able to get a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to paint Jose Marti and Abraham Lincoln in what is called Two Mountain Peaks of America. This was a departure from muralism, but it brought in some financial support, which he was sadly in need of at that time. This particular painting is about 5 feet by 10 feet in size, and it hangs in Havana's Museum of Modern Art today. Marti, Jose Marti is shown on the right. I think you can tell which one's Marti. On the right is Marti. He had been instrumental in Cuba's achieving independence from Spain. Of course, he was killed immediately when he was he's a Cuban hero. Everybody that has ever been to Cuba has seen statues and paintings and so forth of Jose Marti. But he was among the young Cuban intellectuals and the slaves who had mourned Lincoln's death. He was a great, he was a scholar of Lincoln. He became very dedicated to Lincoln's ideals. So this theme of Two Mountain Peaks of America rings true. Now, unlike Sequeiros, Jose Clemente Orozco was never a dedicated communist. He flirted with it off and on, but communism was not a big thing with him. He was dedicated to the masses. His mural spoke to his personal independent views of the plight of the masses in Mexico. In 1932, Orozco went to Dartmouth College and painted a complex of murals entitled The Ethic of American Civilization. The faculty and administration of Dartmouth had tried for several years to get him to come do some work for them, but the Rockefeller's family influence, not monetary, their family influence tipped the balance and encouraged him, attracted him to accept Dartmouth's offer. And by the way, if you get a chance and have the inclination, Google Dartmouth murals for some very interesting details that I won't give you, some beautiful shots of the murals. At that particular time, Nelson Rockefeller, you've seen Nelson's pictures, but you've probably never seen him as a young fellow like this. But Nelson was a student at Dartmouth, and it's possible, perhaps, that Orozco's presence influenced his well-known dedication to art in later life. We'll get back to Nelson a little bit later. But Orozco spent 2 years on this mural. This doesn't do it justice, obviously, here. But he spent 2 years on the project. Now, this is one of the most important murals ever painted. And it's available to visitors at Dartmouth College right now. Abraham Lincoln is featured in one panel, themed Altruism, Order, and Peace, illustrating Orozco's view of Lincoln's impact throughout the New World. This mural is painted in, I think I have another shot of showing some of the panels, but it's painted in two halves. One is pre-Columbian America, the other is post-Cortez. And it demonstrates the American experience. And American experience doesn't mean the United States, obviously. I don't have to tell you people that, that's your business. But the American experience, the struggles toward greatness, the frailties, and so forth. Now, he, after having spent about 10 years, I didn't mention this, you saw it, I'm sure. Well, where am I? Oh, it's not on. Okay. After spending about 10 years in the United States, Orozco returned to Mexico and continued painting at a frantic pace. And one that's pertinent to this particular topic today is the Pina mural in the Government Palace in Chihuahua. And he did a lot of paintings in Guadalajara out of the dome of the Government Palace there, but to the best of my knowledge, Lincoln wasn't present in those murals. But at the Government Palace in Chihuahua, we have this particular panel that illustrates Abraham Lincoln, Benito Juarez, and Simon Bolivar. It's called The Liberators. Diego Rivera also saw Lincoln as one of the New World's most influential individuals. Rivera was commissioned to paint a large fresco called Pan American Unity for the 1940 Golden Gate Exposition in San Francisco. This particular fresco this particular mural he painted was 22 feet by 74 feet. Put that in perspective, what do we have, 12 feet, 10 feet higher than the ceiling here, and 74 feet. These were massive, these murals were massive undertakings. But he painted during that exposition, it was during the exposition he painted it, and people saw Rivera and other artists at work on their projects during that time. It was, as I said, 22 by 74 feet. It was 10 steel framed panels that were bolted together, and after the exposition, they were taken down and stored for, I think, 21 years they were stored. Now, though, it's housed in the City College of San Francisco so that we can see it again. Lincoln appears in the mural. I'd like to have a pointer here. Lincoln appears in the mural along with Mexico's Hidalgo and Muralists. Can you see this? We see Lincoln here with the Gettysburg Address, but he appears with Mexico's Hidalgo and Muralists, who were priests who were involved in initiating the Mexican Revolution, looking for independence from Spain. And both of them, of course, were caught and executed pretty quickly. Also, you have, again, Simon Bolivar, another one of the liberators, appears so frequently with Abraham Lincoln. Also shown are George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and John Brown. Lincoln, as I said, is holding the Gettysburg Address. In 1932, well, first I'll give you again an idea of the immensity of this particular mural. By the way, one of the things I didn't mention earlier, physically, when they're doing these murals, doing frescoes, they put in wet plaster, they paint on the plaster. They have to have workers. Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros did the painting, but they had a host of people helping them, mixing the pigments, mixing the what am I trying to say? Yeah, okay. But anyway, they got all these helpers. One of the things I did mention earlier is Orozco could be said to have painted his single-handedly. You know why? I see somebody smiling, but you know. Okay. He painted his single-handedly. It was said in jest. When he was a young man, he had lost his left hand in a fireworks explosion, so he painted single-handedly. But you can see the immensity of the work that we're talking about here. After, prior to this, we're taking our history back a little bit now. Prior to this development of this particular mural, in 1932, let's go back 8 years. In 1932, Rivera had been commissioned by John D. Rockefeller, again, the Rockefeller connection among all these muralists, to produce a mural for the RCA building in Rockefeller Center. And it was to be patient. Here's the title of it. Man at the crossroads and looking with uncertainty, but with high hope and high vision, to the choosing of a course leading to the new and better future. That's an optimistic kind of title, certainly a long one. But following, during the long period of doing this particular mural, there was an uneasy truce. The Rockefellers knew that Rivera had communist leanings, and there was some uncertainty all along. But because of the conflicting philosophies of the protagonist here. But at the end, right at the end, the mural was finished. And at the end, Rivera put a head of Lenin, which was a red flag, to the Rockefeller. So he put a head of Lenin in there, and some thought it was to take the spotlight off of what Stalin, the murderous things that Stalin was doing there. Let's go back to Lenin, some pure communism. But whatever the motivation, the Rockefellers couldn't ignore that. Nelson has grown up now a little bit and asked that Lenin's face be removed. He's negotiating with. He's known him since he did. He's known him for quite some time, but he's left Dartmouth and has been negotiating the mural with Rivera. And he asked that Lenin's face be removed or make it more generic, so it's not so obvious. And Rivera refused. Artists are temperamental people. No offense. No offense. But he refused. He offered to balance the head of Lenin with one of Abraham Lincoln. Hey, what could be more fair in Diego's mind? That was not enough. Rivera was fired. The frescoes were temporarily covered, and then with sledgehammers destroyed. Interestingly, one of Rivera in later years replicated it in Mexico City. He got Lenin in his final one. It's ironic, really, that communism would be at the root of the loss of this monumental work. Because Rivera was an on-again, off-again communist who had been expelled from the party more than once. His political beliefs were somewhere between those of Siqueiros and Orozco. He had been a good friend of Trotsky. His wife was a better friend of Trotsky at one point. But the Rockefeller connection was common to all of these, as was an unambiguous respect for Abraham Lincoln. Siqueiros' Two Mountain Peaks of America, Orozco's Altruism and the Liberator, the two pieces, and Rivera's Pan American Unity illustrate the esteem held by Lincoln for these iconic, Mexican muralists. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, we'll have some questions. Now we have, yes, we have
If you have a
10
question,
minutes for questions.
if you have a question, I have to let you know I have a severe hearing deficit. Okay, no question. Let's do this better.
No, you don't get off that lightly. I'll ask you a question if no one else will.
Is anyone else using this?
Yes.
Yes, Shahab will be in a few minutes. I do have a question, if I may ask you one. How important for Lincoln iconography is the age at which he's depicted? Because I noticed the first two are very similar in that a slightly older Lincoln, he looks gaunt, he looks bowed down by care, and then the third one was younger. Is that a very important aspect of iconography?
I expect it is, because they were talking about Lincoln as a liberator. Well, when he liberated, he was under tremendous mental, emotional, and physical stress. I haven't thought about that, but I think that's probably pretty pertinent.
Do we have any other questions? No? Then, are you going to be using the... So I'd like to introduce Rodney Grunes. You probably needs no introduction. He's been attending these events for many years. He tells me that he goes all the way back to the 1980s. And is a long-term friend of Dr. Peterson. He looks like he didn't want me to share that piece of information. But he's going to be talking about politics and religion and the founding of the State of Israel. Thank you.
Well, yes, Bill, and like other speakers, I'd like to thank Bill. Bill, now that I'm emeritus, I can look back and say Bill's had a tremendous impact on my career. I taught at Centenary College. I'm down the block some. But this was almost a second home. And I still remember my first publication with Bill was for the bicentennial. That's how far back we went. And it's one of those books that's in the room next door on grassroots constitutionalism. And I have two pieces in that. And what Bill doesn't know, though, I was just so proud of that. I had just been in Shreveport for a year, and that came out, and I was so excited until the dean approached me about it at Centenary, and she said to me, "Rodney, I guess we're not working you hard enough. Where do you have time to write articles that get published so quickly?" So what may have started out as a very happy thing scared me at this point, so I didn't have tenure, that the dean would think that this is a negative as opposed to a positive. So that was the beginning, and this has become almost a second home, not only for these conferences, but Bill has been generous enough to have me as a Constitution Day speaker on a number of occasions, and that brought me here often to this college, which is actually closer to where I live. So I thank you for all of that. Okay, Ben-Gurion, Lincoln, and religious freedom. And let me start, being a political scientist, with the thesis statement, which is more or less the abstract, which is in your $27 book that you have. Although not religious in the traditional sense, both Abraham Lincoln and David Ben-Gurion Lincoln during the Civil War, Ben-Gurion in the building of the modern state of Israel, relied on civil religion as a key leadership tool to unify the people, to promote the survival of the nation, and advance religious liberty through the politics of accommodation. Yet there were some fundamental differences between the two leaders involving the consistency of their personal religious views and their public views. Unlike Lincoln, Ben-Gurion advanced public policies that were contrary to his private religious beliefs, especially his view that religion should be kept out of government and public policies as much as possible. Both leaders, on the other hand, were in agreement that there should be no separation of the state and religion. For Lincoln, this meant a rejection of the Jeffersonian dictum of erecting a wall of separation between church and state. For Ben-Gurion, he saw the existence of a common faith between the state of Israel and the Jewish people. He feared that such a separation would, quote, mar Jewish education in the country, divide the Jewish people, and widen the gap between the religious and secular halves of the nation. What sort of inspired this other than Bill coming to me and saying, let's do something on Lincoln and the world? That was, I guess, the impetus for it. Well, when Ben-Gurion made his first trip to the United States, one commentator called him the George Washington of his country. But Ben-Gurion disagreed with that description. He said he wanted to be remembered as the Abraham Lincoln of Israel, hence the paper. And Ben-Gurion actually had a penmanship drawing of Lincoln, which contained the full text of the Emancipation Proclamation, proudly displayed on his wall in the Prime Minister's office. So that's another Lincoln connection, if you will. And of course, I had even known before I started the research that these were two faith-based leaders, but not religious in the traditional sense of being religious, in the personal sense, with Ben-Gurion avoiding synagogues even during high holy days, and Lincoln avoiding any membership in any particular church. But both leaders used civil religion as a tool, and that became one of my interests as well in dealing with Jefferson and Madison before this. Okay, let's take a look at the personal religious beliefs of David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel. Well, for Ben-Gurion, his view of Judaism was inseparable from the use of civil religion. Judaism, he thought, was different from other religions because he saw it as a national religion. He made as a centerpiece of this the Hebrew Bible, but he was also, he said, influenced by other things such as Buddhism and Spinoza and Plato's political philosophy. He viewed himself as being spiritual, but not necessarily religious, but not purely secular either. He was a believer in God, but not a personal God. He always used the phrase an omnipotent creator, which is closer, obviously, to Jefferson than to Lincoln. He was not a practicing Jew, and this comes as a surprise to some people. He was married in a civil ceremony, and even after the establishment of the State of Israel, he did not want a religious ceremony. He did not observe the Sabbath, although as Prime Minister he would require everyone to not follow him in that respect. He continued life as usual on the high holy days. That didn't interfere with having to do what he had to do. He didn't celebrate Jewish festivals. There were no special holiday meals. He did not follow Jewish dietary laws. There were no holy objects in his house, no mezuzahs on his doors, for example. And he took pride, he said it many times, that he had never set foot in an Israeli synagogue of any sort, Orthodox, conservative, Reform. Well, moving on to Ben-Gurion on religion and politics, and we get to see, not unexpectedly, that the Bible becomes our mandate, he says. And he took this view even before the establishment of the State of Israel. He combined, if you will, biblical religion, nationalism, and the establishment of the State of Israel as central to his understanding of civil religion as a leadership tool. And Ben-Gurion, scholars have called his use of civil religion statism, mainly because the establishment of the State of Israel and the use of religious symbols becomes almost one and the same. The major events of Ben-Gurion's civil religion, obviously central is the State of Israel, but also the mass immigration that followed the declaration of statehood, because Israel was inundated with people, mostly from Europe, and this would create some political problems as well, although it was central to his view of why civil religion was needed. He made Hebrew the official and internationally recognized language. He used biblical phrases in his speeches rather regularly to serve, however, the purposes of what he described as a secular democratic state. He used terms like covenant, the commandments, that sort of thing, just regularly. And he used the symbol. He thought that civil religion required having the symbols of this secular democratic state. They included having a national flag, the blue and white flag, which were the colors of the traditional Jewish prayer shawl, with the Star of David being in the middle. The menorah served as a sacred symbol of the Israeli state. And then there were the ceremonial symbols of civil religion as part of the new State of Israel. So Independence Day, for example, was 13 days after the holiday of Passover. There were memorial days to honor the the Defense Force soldiers who died during the War of Independence. The Holocaust Day, which was established in 1952. Passover and Hanukkah as being major holidays. Archaeology became the national hobby. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting was the establishment of Bible circles, Bible study circles, which became an intricate part of what Ben-Gurion tried to use to unify the people. And I wanted to read a little bit about that to you. The Bible study circles, Ben-Gurion
Ben-Gurion said would allow Israelis to understand their origins, their species, their spirit, their purpose, and their future by bringing consciousness about the Bible to the people by educators, dramatists, painters, sculptors, musicians, and writers. The highlight of these circles was the annual Bible quiz, which quickly became a national ceremony with attendance by Ben-Gurion and other government leaders. Now, Ben-Gurion, religion and politics. The Bible, as I said, was to be a mandate. That was his view before even the state of Israel was created. It involved a combination of biblical religion, nationalism, and of course the statehood itself. That became part of his leadership, and Ben-Gurion became the hero of this civil religion, if you will, the statism that he had. There were some major events to this Ben-Gurion civil religion. We had a combination. One of his problems was Ben-Gurion, as the hero, did not have a majority support. And politically, because of the parliamentary system, Ben-Gurion was forced to find ways to get the religious people to become part of a political coalition, even though he was so committed to a secular state. And this really upset him, that he would have to make deals, particularly with the Orthodox rabbinate, in order to unify the people. And the parliamentary system meant that since his party became the Labor Party, could not gather a majority, he needed to make political concessions in order to unify the nation. And the status quo agreement was perhaps the culmination of this. And that agreement with the Orthodox rabbinate would become part of the problems that Israel continues to face even today. And so this agreement, necessitated by the political situation, had the following elements. Jewish Sabbath would be a day of rest. Public transportation would not operate on the Sabbath, though localities remained free to run their own transportation systems. Jewish dietary laws would be maintained by all public institutions. The existing religious school system, including the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox streams, would remain separate from the secular, but would receive state funding, which became, and still is, an important area of conflict. And that Orthodox rabbinical courts applying Jewish religious law would decide, quote, matters of personal status, marriage, divorce, conversion, which also remains a major problem today in Israel, and the whole who is a Jew debate. Now, if Ben-Gurion had his way, it was very simple. Anyone who wanted to come to Israel and said they were Jewish, that's fine. But the Orthodox rabbinate would have nothing of that and put tremendous pressure on him for them to have control over the question of who is a Jew. And so if you wanted to be a Jew and wanted to come to the land of Israel, that wasn't enough. And you had to have a Jewish mother, so saith the Orthodox rabbinate. Well, he saw many advantages to this accommodation. It would promote and unify the state. It would foster a stable government. And he said without concessions to religious interests, there would be continuous confrontations, even perhaps war between the different factions, which would make unity impossible, and therefore the survival of the state of Israel impossible. But there are some ironies here, right? I mean, this is contrary to his personal views of religious freedom in a democratic and secular state, and also contrary to his personal religious beliefs with respect to prayers and the nature of God and all those sorts of things. But I should point out, he was smart enough as a politician, so when he went abroad, he actually did go to synagogue. He wouldn't do that in Israel, but when he was representing the state abroad, he did do that. He ultimately said he did the best he could. And he realized that he hadn't done enough, but he couldn't do very much more. And he's probably right, that the accommodations had to be made if he was to unify. So he had this instrumental view of religion to promote unity, a civil religion-based view, and the controversies, particularly the law of return controversy, continues to be divisive in the state of Israel today. Now, with respect to Lincoln, Liebert called him our most religious president. He's been called paradoxical, vexatiously skeptical, I like that, intensely spiritual, a theist, a believer. His personal religious beliefs are usually subsumed to the fact that he was a non-churchgoer, although there are some scholars who say he changed over time, moving back closer to his father's Calvinistic determinism. He was not a member of any Christian church, though as president he did attend the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. He took the view that God, as an omnipotent creator, was a formidable force in history. In his meditation on the divine will, he argued that God was, if you will, willing the Civil War. But like Ben-Gurion, he also thought that there was no personal reason. He too used civil religion. He has been described by scholars as an instrument of God. The theologian of the American democratic faith, the embodiment of biblical republicanism, again with a small r. Joseph Fournier said he combined the Judeo-Christian tradition of biblical faith and the founder's tradition of self-government. The centrality to his political philosophy was the Declaration of Independence. It placed nature's God, very Jeffersonian, over secular society. It made the protection of inalienable rights and the promotion of equality the major functions of democratic government. Lincoln called this, by the way, his political religion, and what we call the civil religion. But the implementation of this required another part of his philosophy, the rule of law, which was quite central to his philosophy. Well, he used political religion. He used biblical passages in his speeches. He proclaimed regularly his faith in the Almighty, and basically to unite a divided nation. Picard and Linder call him the prophetic voice in American civil religion, particularly particularly as seen in his second inaugural address, where, you know, he saw the Civil War as a divine judgment upon North and South for the sin of slavery. Now, Lincoln's accommodation of religion through civil religion has one little caveat that the Israelis don't have to worry about, which is the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and its religion clauses. He made, in order to promote unity, particularly during the Civil War, many accommodations. These included the Sabbath in the military, ceremonial days of fasting, prayer and thanksgiving, appointment of chaplains to serve in the military and in hospitals, scenes, annual messages to Congress, attempt to persuade other nations to adopt anti-slavery resolutions, allowing his last act, in God we trust, to be placed on coins, though it was not done in his administration. And of course, he made a special effort, and one of the reasons I got interested in this, to include American Jews in the life of the nation. Let me say a little word about these quickly. On Sabbath in the military, his Sabbath observance order of November 5th, 1863, it was an appeal mostly to Christian soldiers, I might add, but it did establish Sunday as the day of rest, which is, of course, Christian day of rest, not necessarily Jewish one. There were ceremonial days. 4 months after the attack on Fort Sumter, we had our first national fast day for humiliation, prayer, and fasting. We had days of Thanksgiving in both the fall and the spring in order to thank the Heavenly Father for the inestimable blessings. We had appointment of chaplains, relying on Protestant and Catholic clergy to suggest volunteers, which begins to blur the line, by the way, between church and state. So we had chaplains for hospitals and military, including asking for a change in the law to allow to appoint a rabbi to serve in a predominantly Jewish regiment in New York. In the annual messages to Congress, I want to make one because it jives with our first presenter. He, in 1863, endorsed in his annual message, inculcating Native Americans with Christian beliefs, as if that might do something. He also blurred civil religion with the establishment clause in some of his statements, trying to convince other countries not to support the Confederacy and to view like him now that slavery was an evil. His inclusion of American Jews, in 1862 he signed a law to allow for brigade chaplains, one or more which had to be either Catholic, Protestant, or Jews. He opposed actually anti-Semitism, and maybe he's our first president who actually addressed that issue. And I suppose the key policy is, in this area, is rescinding General Ulysses S. Grant Order Number 11 on January 7th, 1863, which had expelled all Jews as a class. Grant called them an intolerable nuisance, perhaps because of their trade with the Confederacy, from his department. Well, so is David Ben-Gurion the Abraham Lincoln Israel, like he said he was? Should he be granted his wish to be remembered as such? Well, both made, and I guess the answer is somewhat. Both made major use of civil religion, Ben-Gurion to establish and maintain and unify the state of Israel, Lincoln to unite a divided nation and to save the republic during the Civil War. There are some similarities in their approaches. but differences too. And I want to list a few of these in summary. First, the Bible was a central part of both the civil religions of Ben-Gurion and Lincoln. It was the unique major document in providing substance to their attempts to unify. But the Bible was perhaps more for Lincoln part of his personal development, his personal views on religion, certainly more than Ben-Gurion. Second, although neither Ben-Gurion nor Lincoln ever belonged to a specific house of worship, they both professed to be believers, so that's a similarities, although Lincoln much more a believer in a transcendent God than Ben-Gurion. Third, both David Ben-Gurion and Lincoln used civil religion as the basis of their political leadership. Again, there are similarities and differences faced with the problems associated with establishing a new state and then through nation building, sustaining its existence. Ben-Gurion utilized what scholars call statism to produce cultural and political integration. His civil religion was a unique combination where the history and story of the Jewish people as found in the Bible was combined with a nationalism embodied in the return to Zion and an expression of the Jewish spirit that promised redemption for Israel and, for that matter, for all humanity. There were the myths and the ceremonial holidays, the establishment of Hebrew as the national language, the biblical phrases, the Bible study circles. In all of these, Ben-Gurion transformed traditional religious ideas and rituals into secular manifestations of the civil religion. Fourth, although there was one privately held position that Ben-Gurion wanted to keep, preventing the Jewish establishment from entering government and politics in Israel, but he wasn't able to prevent that. And the 1947 status quo agreement with the Orthodox rabbinate had perceived the perceived need to form political coalitions with religious parties made that wish impossible. Abraham Lincoln's civil religion was clearly different than Ben-Gurion's, although the nature's God was not very different from Ben-Gurion's civil religion. He assumed the existence of a transcendental God, transcendent God. Moreover, his civil religion, often referred to as civic republicanism by scholars, combined the dependence of the nation upon providence with the basic principles of freedom and equality found in the Declaration of Independence. As Joseph Tornari has further explained, Lincoln's conception of liberty combined a moral obligation to the Declaration with a legal obligation to the Constitution. Finally, like David Ben-Gurion, Lincoln had a problem that he could not resolve. Although the rule of law was one of the centerpieces of his civil religion, there was a consistent tension between the religion clauses of the First Amendment. As Byrd and Liebert have noted, quote, the First Amendment guarantees religious freedom and forbids the establishment of any church or religion. The result is a strict separation of the institutions of church and state, but not of religion and politics as such. Americans have always been a fundamentally religious people, and this extends to every level of life, including politics, end quote. While Lincoln's God-centered rhetoric and use of religious symbolism does not violate the Establishment Clause, the making of Thanksgiving into a national religious holidays, appointing military chaplains, providing national days of prayer, and even allowing In God We Trust to be placed on a coin, comes closer to violating the President's cherished commitment to the rule of law. As Derek Davis has noted, all of these practices are a violation of a strict notion of the separation of church and state.
We do have 5 minutes for questions.
The terms of Ben-Gurion's coalition, do you have any ideas in terms of the numbers or percentage of Orthodox voters in that Israeli electorate early on, in terms of how Ben-Gurion's thinking about his coalition? How big is that Orthodox dynamic in terms of his coalition?
We don't have data, but I suspect it hasn't changed all that much. Most Israelis have always been secular. And after all, the Zionist movement was a secular movement to begin with, and that's out of which statism actually developed. So the Orthodox rabbinate has always had a disproportionate impact in terms of, hey, what percentage of Israelis are actually Orthodox. Ironically, the immigration from the Soviet Union, that actually increased the number of Orthodox and made their politics a whole lot more conservative than Ben-Gurion would have ever imagined. Ben-Gurion thought, by the way, that the accommodations he made with the Orthodox rabbinate was a temporary thing. He really had almost the same view as Jefferson, that over time, this religion stuff would wither away, and that it would no longer be a problem in the state of Israel. Jefferson was wrong about the United States, and Ben-Gurion was wrong about the state of Israel.
I think the issue with the Orthodox is they're not very many. It's not a huge thing.
Right.
But in the parliamentary system, they're always the swing votes. So that's why you see Netanyahu going after them and getting them on there. Whoever gets the Orthodox contingent on their side rules the government. So there are all kinds of...
Well, but in the beginning, I mean, what Ben-Gurion was able to do during his 2 stints as prime minister was to have a left-of-center coalition. And the concessions actually brought him groups that didn't necessarily agree with his politics. That has dissipated. And so now we have mostly right-of-center coalitions. And religious parties, like ultra-Orthodox religious parties, even drawing the society further to the right, and of course making Ben-Gurion's dream a non-reality. Sort of sad that way.
Rodney, this is a long way from Lincoln, but I wondered how Ben-Gurion got along with, dealt with, or had any contact with Menachem Begin.
Don't know. Yeah.
Just to tie together our presidents, my father served in World War II and hid a Bible, little tiny Bible, and it's from the President Roosevelt to the soldiers serving in the military. So, you know, God thing continues on and on. And as you said at the end, we are a very religious country.
Well, and you know, Douglas said, the famous Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas said, we are a religious people, have always understood. But the civil religion is really using it for religious symbols and terms for a secular purpose. But Lincoln wound up going beyond that. Ben-Gurion tried really hard, and of course, given that his personal religion never changed. I mean, he just wasn't religious. It was just a creative force, the great clockmaker in the sky, and then that was it. But he understood, and both guys understood the need for the unity, for different reasons, but the need to have national unity was the predominant.
So the Gary can also always be seen as a Jefferson, and that he was a Muslim.
Byrd, I loved your talk, and I learned a lot. I think that, and I'm sure you've read it, Meacham's book,
Yes.
American Gospel. he has the best explanation of what the founders were able to succeed with by understanding we were a religious people, and yet being able to have a civil religion. And it's remarkable, Nietzsche makes the comment that the founders had numerous opportunities to inject into the Constitution some Christian imagery, and they did not do it. And it's really quite remarkable.
Well, even, I mean, the person to me who's most remarkable of the founding fathers, and this is Madison.
Yeah.
I mean, given his family background.
Yeah.
And he felt so strongly. In fact, we usually cite Jefferson's wall, but Madison made the comment of there should be a perfect separation between religion and government, which went beyond even Jefferson's, the metaphor that eventually the Supreme Court took on.
And Madison's comment was he didn't like the word tolerate.
Correct.
So we don't tolerate other religions.
Well, I mean, but he was also afraid that once you open the door to the government, you might not like the results.
Mm.
And you know, in Madison's the detached memoranda, which he wrote after he left the White House, he went back and critiqued himself for all the things which he then now concedes blurred the line between civil religion and the Establishment Clause. Madison is extraordinary in that respect.
Well, we had a session.
I think in the interest of time, we're going to